So, Mr. Bryson, you were talking about how you did policy debate in college, is that right?
Yeah, it is. I debated at Piedmont College, which is a small liberal arts school down in northeast Georgia, and I debated several topics that had to do with Chinese policy or foreign policy related to China, agriculture, and what else did I do? Oh yeah, it was European policy, having to do with national defense in Europe.
So all policy debate.
But all policy debate.
All in on policy,
all
okay.
All the fast talking policy debate.
Yeah, were you able to spread too? Could you talk really fast?
Yeah, I didn't like that part of it, but you sort of have to play the game at some point. But I was a fast talker. But you hear the accent, right? Like I can only talk so fast with a southern accent like this. But yeah, I did have to talk fast. But there were a lot of people, and most people were faster than me.
All right. Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of What's the Res? My name is Ethan Delves, and my guest today is Donald Bryson. He's the president and CEO of the Civitas Institute. That institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy organization dedicated to removing barriers to freedom for North Carolinians. He's been the CEO and president of the Civitas Institute since 2018, and from 2014 to 2018, he was the state director of Americans for Prosperity in North Carolina. He's been involved in North Carolina politics for many years, and today he is the content lecturer for Luddy Debate League's first tournament of the 2019-2020 season. So Donald, welcome to What's the Res?
Oh, awesome.
Thanks for joining me
here.
So tell us a little bit about the Civitas Institute. What role do you play? What kind of things does your institute do exactly?
Sure. So the Civitas Institute, next year in 2020, we'll be going to our 15th year, so we started in 2005. We're a state-based public policy think tank. Obviously, we focus on state policy. Specifically, we focus on tax policy, which is why I'm here talking about tax policy and tax credits today. Yeah. We also focus on education policy, specifically within that on school choice, vouchers, charter schools, homeschool, and that sort of thing. And then we also, I think this is unique among state policy groups, we have an analyst and researcher, Dr. Andy Jackson, who focuses on elections law. So things like voter ID and how do we vote in North Carolina, and by how we vote, I mean, do we do electronic voting versus paper ballots, and what are the implications on that? What does turnout look like in different areas and that sort of thing? And that's a very unique thing we do at Civitas.
Okay, so that's a lot of different things for sure.
It is.
Yeah, and you said that you were affiliated with AEI, the National Institute as well. Like,
sure, so the American Enterprise Institute is a national think tank based in Washington, D.C. I was invited earlier this year, actually, to be part of their leadership network, where they get sort of mid-career executive levels to come in and talk about how to create a more civil society and better debate, but more from a conservative perspective, and they provide a lot of good training and content, and I've really enjoyed my partnership with AEI.
Yeah, they have really good content. I cite them for my debate cases all the time, which is why I'm asking.
They do.
Yeah.
They have really great content, and I'll even put a plug in. Arthur Brooks just left as their president, and he'd been there for several years, and he left to do a lot of other things, but he has a documentary that just came out on Netflix. So if people have Netflix, they can go and look up The Pursuit, which is a riff on The Pursuit of Happiness, and he talks about sort of the moral case for capitalism.
That's awesome. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. So when you're talking about the Civitas Institute, I'm wondering what kind of goals do you guys have? Because you said there's so many different things that you focus on, and school vouchers caught my eye too, because we've actually had a resolution for the Luddy Debate League tournaments on school vouchers. What's the goal? What's your goal for the state and for the nation?
Our stated mission is that we fight to remove barriers to freedom so that all North Carolinians can live the life they want to live. Barriers to freedom typically come from government overreach, and so we try to find ways that we can equip people with freedom. To remove state government out of the way and out of their life, and that state government will only provide sort of the core services they need to protect people's rights. We believe that is the role of government, rather than to create rights and provide non-essential services to people.
Okay, so does that process look like? Does that involve legal implications with the state? Or I'm really interested in like how exactly that plays out for different sorts of things.
Sure. So we are a think tank. So a lot of what we do is policy and analysis, and so Tax policy is a good example of where we produced a couple of academic studies over the past few years on how North Carolina can change its tax environment and change its tax code. And those sort of are the impetus that spurred debate as we go on. There was a professor at George Mason University, Dr. Rich Fink. He's not at George Mason anymore, but he came up with a thing called oh my gosh, I've forgotten the name of it. I can't remember the name of it. The idea is, how do we change public policy and how do we change culture in a democracy or in a republic? And the idea is that ideas typically start with academics, and then who write these really long papers and dissertations that nobody reads. And then it filters down to sort of a think tank level, who break it down into analysis and shorter things. And eventually that goes through either a grassroots filter where citizens read it and push lawmakers to do it, or it goes directly to lawmakers. And that's sort of the role that we see ourselves in, that our primary audience are sort of those grassroots, very engaged citizens who will read our papers and talk to their elected officials, but then we also talk to elected officials as well about the ideas. And they may not go 100% with all of our policy references, but if they go with 80%, I think that's a lot of progress.
Okay.
And I think we've seen that a lot in tax policy in North Carolina over the past few years, where we had, a multi-tiered tax system with some of the highest taxes in the Southeast, to where now we have some of the lowest taxes in the country, particularly on corporate taxes, and some of the lowest taxes in the Southeast on personal income taxes. And from that, we've seen sort of a revival of the North Carolina economy, where in 2008, I think sort of at the height of the Great Recession, we had the third highest unemployment rate in the country at 11.5%.
Wow, yeah.
And now we're hovering around the national average, and the national average is exceptionally low. We're around 4%. But economists will tell you that, any unemployment rate below 5% is essentially total employment.
Wow.
And so we're doing pretty good right now.
Yeah, we are doing really good. I know North Carolina's been consistently reducing its corporate tax rate over time as well, and now we're at 2.5%?
2.5%. So
Okay.
there are states that don't have a corporate tax rate, but of the states that do, we have the lowest in the country now.
Okay, and you would say that blanket policy, as opposed to something like targeted tax incentives, is better for economic development?
I think it is.
Than targeted tax incentives.
I think it absolutely is. The problem is that, elected officials have to get reelected, right? And so
Right.
they need some attention. And so when companies are able to create 2 and 3 jobs here and 4 and 5 jobs there, there's no big event to go to. There's no ribbon to cut.
Ribbon and scissors?
Ribbon
Yeah.
and scissors. There's no way to get out in front of a reporter. But when they get to do this one targeted tax break to Amazon for $2 billion, well, that's a really big announcement. And obviously I had a big hand in that.
Yeah.
But the problem with these incentives is that it's some sort of perverse vote buying scheme. And I don't think that's how taxes should be used. Taxes should be used, one, very sparingly, because people work hard for the money that they have. And we
Right.
shouldn't take all of that. We should take the minimal amount to produce the core government services that we need. And 2, it's about fairness. Just because Amazon has better lobbyists than Joe's Hardware on Main Street doesn't mean that the jobs on Joe's Main Street aren't as important to the people that work at Joe's
Right.
Hardware.
And North Carolina has such a diverse economy, too. I was looking at a list the other day. We have a lot of different industries here, because I saw something about plastics, we have aerospace, tons of research and development in RTP, and agriculture as well. So we have a lot of small businesses, I would say, that, man, I can see your unfairness point really
Right.
well, because it really isn't fair to offer those large corporations just because they have better lobbyists as well.
All right, well, that means that at some point the government has made the moral implication that some jobs are more important than others, and I don't think that that's the role of the government to do that.
And is the Civitas Institute, would you say, being the middleman in between those academics that write those really long dissertations, and you read those and make the Civitas articles and distribute information to those grassroots areas you were talking about, is that a way, or maybe perhaps a solution to these voter issues that we see, where voters want to vote for the ribbon and scissors? We see these big events. Do you think that the information that the Civitas Institute gives to the public would aid in helping voters make more long-term beneficial decisions?
I think so. We obviously, we're a nonpartisan organization and we don't get involved in elections, but we do think that if people are going to vote for the people who vote on public policy, which are our elected officials, that the voters themselves should be instructed on public policy. And so in that way, we think, we're doing a pretty good job. Obviously we're active on our website. Everybody has an active website. But we also have a podcast of our own called Civitalk. If
Really?
you want to look at it, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Just
And
everyone
if you
go
wanna
look at Civitalk.
Yeah, if you want to come down and record sometime, you're more than welcome to use our studio.
Thank you.
And then we also have a statewide newspaper called Capital Connection, and we, the point of that, the distribution is around 30,000 people, and the point of that is to let people know what's going on in Raleigh. Because people go home and they look at their local newspaper, they know what happened at City Hall, and they'll watch Fox News or CNN or whatever, and they know what happened in Washington, but they have no idea what happened in Raleigh. And so we think that we're sort of filling that gap on state policy and state politics.
And I see in debate a lot that people really like to separate local, state, and federal policy. How intertwined are those things, and what kind of things can you shift in state policy that would sort of not, like, I know everything's interrelated. I'm just asking how interconnected are these things? Because for debaters, it's really helpful to be able to separate these sometimes and see the
Sure.
exclusivity there. So, yeah.
Sure. Well, they're all, to your point, very interconnected, and all sort of depends on what you want to talk about. On the topic of education, it's almost impossible to separate those three, because the state essentially administers the public education system in North Carolina. But if they don't do certain things, then there are billions in federal funding that they won't get. And at the same time, the state controls a lot of what local school boards and those elected officials can do. School calendars are a good example, and they may not sound like a big deal, but when we have hurricanes hitting the state and snowstorms hitting the western part of the state, and schools are out for weeks at a time, that really affects the school calendar. How far into the summer do people have to go to school and that sort of thing, and people want that flexibility with their own local school system, but will the state give them the freedom to do that? And if the state does give them the freedom to do that, are they hitting the minimum amount of days that the federal government requires to get all the federal funding?
Yeah.
It gets really complicated.
So that's a mess, and I can imagine that these policies hardly ever align with each other with all the different needs that every individual state would have.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can see how that would be.
Absolutely. And every state does have individual needs. Every community has individual needs, which is part of why we talk about, why, smaller and more localized government is more important, because it's able to adjust to the needs of its community better.
And North Carolina, I know, has a really divided state government as it is now, because we have a Republican legislature and a Democratic governor. So what role do you think that plays in our ability to make state policy decisions? And does that make it extremely difficult to get things done with that kind of diversity?
Well, in the lecture talk, I said that, we don't need to argue less in American politics. We need to argue more, but we need to argue better.
I agree, completely agree.
And right now, I think we have terrible argumentation going on between the General Assembly and the governor. There are partisan pot shots going on all over the place. Now, we can talk about whose fault it is and all that, and I think everybody probably has an opinion, but these guys need to figure out how to argue better, because otherwise, some things that need to get done are not going to get done. And, as we were going into this weekend and Hurricane Dorian was coming on the coast of North Carolina, because obviously I work at a think tank, this is what I was doing. I was looking at the last general fund report from the state controller, and I saw that there's still $328 million in the Hurricane Florence disaster recovery fund.
Oh, man.
And Hurricane Florence hit September 8th of last year.
So it stacks up
And
really
so, yeah,
fast.
so like instead of us like trying to throw pot shots at each other, let's talk about why is there still $328 million for storm recovery from a storm from last year, which implies to me, and I don't know this to be the case, but it implies to me that there are still people probably living in FEMA trailers whose businesses haven't been rebuilt and all that sort of thing. That's not good government. But we're not talking about that. Instead, we're talking about all this other stuff that isn't relevant to the daily lives.
So there's immediate needs that need to be met. So
Right.
Yeah. And I can't imagine living in a trailer for, over a year and then having another hurricane. I guess it's part of the drawbacks.
Plenty of people live in mobile homes, but they make them their permanent homes.
Right.
FEMA trailers were not meant to be permanent.
They're just temporary homes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I can't imagine, because I guess that's one of the drawbacks of being a coastal state. You have to face those policy decisions. So it's
Yeah.
even more important for us to be able to have policies go through in an efficient manner, even when our government is divided. And I can see that the role that debate plays that you were just talking about, we need to argue more. So how do you feel that policy debate has helped you be able to argue better, or having practiced it in college when you founded the Civitas Institute, when you're a partner with the American Enterprise Institute? How has debate influenced that?
Sure. So, I mean, it's more practical than you would think. So when you put together an affirmative plan in policy debate, you set up sort of the uniqueness. This is the status quo of the current situation that we have. Here are the harms from the current situation, or sometimes people call those advantages. Then you put together a plan, however long you want your plan to be, and then here's the solvency. Here's how we get to enforcing that plan, and that's essentially what I do every day at the Civitas Institute.
Just make affirmative plans all day long.
That's right. That's how public policy is done. And then on the negative side, when I disagree with other policies that have been presented, Medicaid expansion being an example that Governor Roy Cooper has put out, instead of rebutting, I can rebut some of his claims about health care directly, but then I can also talk about counter plans, like here are some alternatives to get to the same place that might be better. There can be sort of philosophical critiques that you see in a lot of college debate about, here are the problems with the mindset that you have setting this up, and the implications of maybe not on this policy, but how that sets us up down the road and how we talk about it. And so, policy debate has been a great tool for me. Obviously, I'm not talking at 300 words a minute like I did in college, but at least the mental construct has been phenomenal.
And have you heard of it's the negative, or it's the affirmative? Because I've never done policy, so I'm a little bit rusty on these topics as well. There's something called perming the plan, where one side will just say, involve the other side.
Right.
It's like, okay, we could just do both. What do you think of that? Because I just learned about this at the Coolidge Cup, the most recent Coolidge Cup.
Right.
So that was mind-blowing to me, because I didn't even think of that. So
you can sort of do a permutation, and that's generally an affirmative answer to a negative counterplan, or sometimes a negative critique of, there's no reason why the counterplan and the original plan are mutually exclusive. And so I'm trying to think of an example. One counterplan that people brought up all the time in college, it didn't matter what you did, what your plan was, they wanted to consult Japan on it.
Okay.
That we would consult Japan, and our agreement with Japan would be binding in that. And so the permutation would be, well, let's just do both. Let's do the plan, we'll consult Japan on it, and we're still going to do the plan anyway, and so we get all the affirmative advantages plus all the advantages of the counter plan. And sometimes that's handy in policy debate, or in real life public policy debate. And then sometimes you can't really get it done. Healthcare is an example of that, where you have one side of the debate that actually wants to expand the size and role of government, and we'll call that the affirmative. And the negative side says, well, no, but here are all these other alternatives that don't expand the size of government.
you can't perm that.
Yeah. Now the other side will say, well, let's do both. Let's reform certificate of need laws and all these other regulations while we expand Medicaid. But from a negative standpoint, or from the Civitas standpoint, I'd be like, but we're still expanding the size and role of government, and that's a problem. And so that's how that's how counter plan debate would sort of play out in a competitive policy debate.
And I think it's really useful that you, being at the top of the Civitas Institute, you've had this foundation of debate behind it as well, because it sounds like it has a decent amount of utility even moving into out of college.
It absolutely does. Just the way it trains your mind to think about a lot of things, and the focus, and just getting used to reading public policy literature, which can sometimes be dry, but then you finally find this one gold nugget in there. You're like, oh, this is just mind blowing.
Yeah,
this is a great idea, and you really want to start arguing about it. But I really miss debate. It added so much value to my college experience, and then even after college, when I was still able to coach, I really enjoyed it. The whole community.
Yeah, the things that I love most, when I'm reading those long documents, because it's not a policy debate, but it's a policy resolution, is reading those things, and the mindset that you said with the philosophical implications. Are those still relevant in policy debate? Because I know a lot of policy debaters will stay away from that kind of thing because it doesn't really have too much of a place in the round. But I love philosophy, and it's kind of my thing. So I want to know, does this transfer over as well?
No, it absolutely transfers over. And so you have, for whatever reason, in collegiate debate, they use the German spelling of critique. So
with the K?
So it's Kritik, and for short, in round, people just call it the K. You have a lot of strict policy debaters who will just debate the policy, and they'll lay out a plan basically like I just did. And then you have what are just called K debaters who, they don't really want to get into the hardcore policy of everything, but they want to talk about sort of the philosophical implications and why those are dangerous or maybe not dangerous in a lot of things. you see teams that win and win big at both. And it's funny because you can kind of guess based on what university people come from, how they're going to debate.
I've seen people do that.
So like Georgia and Michigan State and even Liberty University are more of the traditional policy side debate. But then you get Idaho State and some of the California schools like Berkeley, and they get very K-ish type debate. And again, you can see success with both. I think probably the most successful debaters are the ones that can do kind of both and answer both. And those are the ones that end up winning sort of the national championships.
Okay, so I'm going to shift topics a little bit here because I want to go back to the foundation or the structure of the Civitas Institute as well. What is your role as being CEO? What is your job and what kind of your day-to-day for what you do for the Civitas Institute?
Literally my day, none of my days are the same.
Okay.
None of them are. My job sort of runs the gamut of checking in with our policy team and sort of setting a vision and goals for what we want to talk about in terms of public policy. But then we're a nonprofit as well, right? So I have to raise money.
Right.
I've got a director of development who helps with that. We have operations. We just moved our offices this week, and so setting up all the operations for that.
So where is the location?
So we're just off Spring Forest Road. I can't remember our new address. Literally, we moved day
just
before
now?
yesterday.
Yeah. Okay.
But we're off Spring Forest Road, not far from the intersection with Falls of Neuse.
Okay.
But it's on our website if people want to check it out. It's at nccivitas.org, and I know the new address is on the website.
Yeah.
But on top of all the other things that I've talked about that Civitas does, we do one more unique thing is that we do 8 to 10 statewide public opinion polls every year.
Okay.
And so we have to put the polls out in the field. We work with Harper Polling out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
I was about to say, how do you put a poll together for an entire state? Because that's not something you see every day for sure.
No. So we write the polls and get the questions all written up. It's typically 25 to 30 questions. And then we work with Harper Polling, who actually executes the poll. They get all the calls done and they tabulate the results and get it back to us. And so we ask questions all the time, political questions. What do you think about this race, that race? Who would you vote for? But how do you think that the direction of the country is in the right direction? Is it off on the wrong track? What do you think about the state, job approval ratings for the president, the governor? And then we ask policy questions. So we've got a poll in the field right now, actually, that we've got a few questions about trade tariffs because we're in a trade war with China.
Yeah.
And then we've got a few questions about gun control and gun violence and how people think that should be handled.
And that's been a massive topic of discussion, too, in the Democratic debates. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's been a massive topic of discussion. I'm kind of curious to see how the gun questions will come back, just because one of the questions is, do you think that we'll see a decrease in gun violence if we have stricter gun laws? And I'm honest to goodness not sure how that's going to come back.
Because North Carolina does change on certain topics as well. We voted different ways in the past.
We do.
Correct me if I'm wrong. If we're one of those battleground states or those.
We are. We're a battleground state or a bellwether state. The three sort of battleground states you're going to continue to hear about probably for the next 6 to 8 years will be Florida, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. Okay. And sometimes they'll throw Ohio in there, but Ohio's kind of a bear politically to deal with. But we're going to continue to be a battleground state. So if you're tired of seeing political ads in the mail or on TV, I'm sorry.
It's going to keep happening.
It's going to keep happening
consistently.
And just get ready for 2020.
Yeah, I see them on my TV all the time, and it's really cool to see the behind the scenes behind these things too. Because the first step that I do for my debate cases, I don't know if this is the same for you, is because I do LD, and for Coolidge as well. I'll go to all the think tanks I can think of, and then type in the topic in the search bar, and then read up, because I like to get the gist of what I'm arguing about.
Right.
But I read these things all the time about the polls that these institutes do and the surveys that they have and all the answers that they get.
Right.
But now we can actually gain an understanding of how they work, because the Civitas Institute, you were just saying, just sends out the polls, and then you can make articles based. I'm assuming you make articles based on the polls, and you have outreach that relates.
Right. Yeah. We'll do analysis on the polls. We release the polls fully, so they're all on our website, and people could take a look at all that. The hard part about putting the poll together is the part that the Harper Polling does for us, is that you make sure that the demographics are right. Are you getting the right number of registered Democrats, the right number of registered Republicans, unaffiliated, the right percentages of men, women, African Americans,
and they ask
whites,
about
Hispanics.
that all the time.
Yeah, and so you're never going to hit exactly on those percentages, but if you can get as close as possible, it's better. And then trying to weight you know, the regions in the state. So, you know, you don't want to have too many people in Charlotte taking the poll, too many people in Raleigh. You need to have enough people in Greenville and Asheville taking the poll. But Harper does a pretty good job of that. But that's something to watch out for when people look at these national polls. Because, you know, how many of the calls were done in California, how many were done in New York, how many were done in North Carolina. And a California and New York poll looks a lot different than a poll that includes Texas and North Carolina and Kentucky. So just be mindful of that, of sort of the regional demographics when you look at these national polls.
So for a state poll, would you say that if you get the demographic as correct as or as even as possible, would this be an accurate insight as to the political environment of the country as it stands, or do you think people lie on the polls a lot? Because I know some people think, oh, polls aren't reliable, it's just opinions, and people are in some moods some day, some moods another day.
Sure.
So how reliable would you say the results are?
I think overall polls are pretty reliable. Now, people always point back to the 2016 election that all showed Hillary Clinton up and all that. But there are two things to remember. One, polls are not predictive. Polls are a snapshot in time. Polls aren't, this is what's going to happen on Election Day. Polls are, this is how people answered the question August 1st through the 8th of this year. That's all they are.
Okay.
And that gives you an idea of what people are thinking, but it doesn't tell you what they're going to do. The second thing is the press plays a big role in politics. And we ran into this phenomenon in the 2016 presidential election that people were just ashamed to say they were going to vote for Donald Trump. Now, I'll fully admit I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. I didn't vote for president because I just wasn't comfortable doing that. But, you know, you had people called them leaners. You know, you would ask them who they were going to vote for, and they would lean in and whisper and say, Donald Trump. And so, but when people finally got to the ballot box and were actually able to honestly say, this is who I'm going to vote for, well, Donald Trump ends up winning.
Yeah.
And I think we're starting to get past that some, but you can still see why people would be skeptical of polls. But, you know, if people don't answer honestly,
yeah.
You know, we can only do what we can do, but we expect that people will answer honestly in the aggregate.
So do you think those leaners or those people that are afraid to say that they're voting for Donald Trump would say so because then the media would portray him in a light that they don't want to be associated with? Because you said the press had a large role, so I'm wondering, what do you think makes people afraid of articulating something like that?
Well, you know, when a lot of the polls are live caller polls, you're talking to a live person. You don't know if it's being done for a political candidate and that sort of thing sometimes, particularly as you get closer to election season. And honestly, you don't want to be berated for your political opinions. And yeah, I'm not trying to get too political in your podcast, but you know, when you have a presidential candidate get up and say that, you know, half of all Donald Trump supporters are just these deplorable people, well, that's a good third of the country.
You don't want to be associated with that, right?
And so, of course, people didn't vote for Hillary Clinton when they're called deplorable, but of course, they're not comfortable talking about their opinion either, because that means that all Hillary Clinton supporters, which is a good chunk of the country as well, think that they're just deplorable people. And you don't want to have that conversation. And that's what I mean by, we're going full circle on this, but that's what I mean by arguing better. We argue a lot, but we argue terribly in American politics because we call each other deplorable. But you've never been convinced, and I've never convinced. Nobody's ever been convinced of an argument by being degraded like that.
Right.
Like, oh, you're right. I'm deplorable. I'm convinced. All of a sudden, that's not a thing.
Yeah.
We need to argue better, not less. We need to argue better. And calling people deplorable, calling people names, isn't good. And quite honestly, President Trump's not good at that either.
So you could say that debate isn't only important for just those that make policy decisions, but for those on the other side of the spectrum as well, where the voters and the citizens as well
Absolutely.
need to be able to articulate ideas and critically think about ideas as well.
That's absolutely right. You know, Benjamin Franklin, when he walked out of Independence Hall after they had agreed to the Constitution, the lady came and asked him, you know, what do we have, Mr. Franklin? He said, a republic, ma'am, if you can keep it. The if you can keep it part is critical, right? That we have to be engaged citizens as part of a republic. And if people aren't engaging, then none of it really matters. And we may as well, you know, just have autocrats who just come back into their position every year. But it is incumbent upon us to be able to think critically about public policy.
Any of you that are listening right now and are on the fence about trying debate is important. And even though maybe it looks like a lot of work or a little bit unattractive on the outside because it's a very academically rigorous activity, it really does have importance when it comes to learning how to vote, even if you're going to be a policy,
Absolutely.
like making policies. So if you're thinking about trying to debate, definitely go in and do it. And I'm going to mention your podcast one more time. You said it's called Civitalk?
Civitalk.
Okay.
CIVI Talk.
Okay,
All
and you
one
can
word.
find that on most major platforms as
Yeah,
well?
yeah, we're on Spotify, Google Play, and Apple iTunes.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Donald, thank you so much for joining me for this interview.
Thank
I
you
really
so much.
appreciate it. I've had a great time. Everybody, if you want to find the Civitas Institute, you said that's at nccivitas.org. nccivitas.org. If you have any questions about this interview for either Donald or for me, for Josh, then you can email us at whatsttheres@gmail.com. That's WHATSTHERES@gmail.com. Check out our website. That's www.whatsttheres.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at whatsttheres_. And finally, just one last time, I want to mention our premium debates that we have open. If you would like to join our What's the Res premium debates, you could do so, and I'll put the link in the description as well. What you'll get for $3 a month or $30 a year is a list of premium debate episodes that you can listen to, which is real debates between real people. What we're doing is trying to spark debate between different individuals, and our goal is to help discover just a little bit more of the truth. And again, you can do so at $3 a month or $30 a year, and you'll get the premium debate as well as an analysis episode, which is like a play-by-play where you can listen to the debate from a debater's perspective. And until next time, work hard, speak well, and seek the truth.